Welcome, dear dreamers. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. In this quiet hour, as the world slows and the day begins to loosen its hold, we journey far out across the Pacific Ocean to a world of islands rising from deep blue waters, of stars used as maps, of winds that carry stories across thousands of miles. Tonight, we explore the legends of Maui, the clever trickster, the daring demigod, the restless spirit who once slowed the sun, fished islands from the sea, stole the secret of fire, and even attempted to challenge death itself. His stories have been carried for generations across Hawaii, Aotearoa, Samoa, Tahiti, and throughout Polynesia, told beside ocean shores, beneath wide constellations, and in the gentle rhythm of waves meeting sand. In this episode, we'll move slowly through 100 relaxing facts about Maui and the world that shaped him. His bold adventures, his clever mischief, his triumphs, and his final, humbling lesson. As always, this is a space for rest and reflection. The pace will be unhurried. The stories will unfold gently, and you are welcome simply to listen or to drift. If you enjoy exploring ancient legends in a calm and peaceful way, consider subscribing to Sleepy Legends. And if this video brings you comfort, as simple like lets YouTube know that quiet storytelling still has a place in this busy world. Now settle in, take a slow breath, and let us begin at a time when the sky and the earth were not yet apart. Long before the first islands rose from the ocean, long before the first bird called out across an open sky, there was only darkness. In Polynesian traditions, the world began in a state of deep closeness, not the comfortable kind you feel wrapped in a warm blanket on a quiet night, but a total pressing togetherness. Sky and earth were not separate beings looking across a distance at one another. They were one, locked together, fused in an embrace so complete that nothing could pass between them. No light, no air, no room for anything to grow or breathe or begin. This is where our story starts, not with action, not with noise, but with stillness, with waiting, with the slow, ancient pressure of something enormous preparing to change. And change it did. In the great mythologies carried across the Pacific Ocean from island to island, generation to generation, the Sky Father and the Earth Mother were eventually separated, pushed apart by the will of their children, or by the sheer force of life needing room to exist. And in that moment, that long, slow, impossible moment when sky and earth finally pulled away from each other, light came flooding in. Space was created. The world as we might recognize it began to take shape. Sea filled the gaps. Islands pushed up through the surface. Trees reached upward. Birds found air to carry them. It was into this expanding, breathing, awakening world that Maui was born. His name echoes across the entire Polynesian Triangle, one of the largest cultural regions on Earth, stretching across millions of square miles of open ocean. You'll find his stories in Hawaii, where he is a trickster and a hero. You'll find them in Aotearoa, the land the Maori people call home, where his deeds are told around fires and passed down through generations. His tales reach Samoa, Tahiti, and beyond. Across all of these islands, separated by vast stretches of open water. People have been telling stories about the same remarkable figure for hundreds and hundreds of years. What's fascinating is that the details shift and change depending on where you hear the story. The names of his family members may differ. The order of his great deeds might be rearranged. Certain adventures belong only to one island's tradition. But through all of it, Maui himself stays remarkably consistent, clever, bold, restless, always pushing against the boundaries of what is allowed, what is possible, what has simply always been accepted as the way things are. He is the kind of figure who looks at a rule and immediately wants to know what happens if you break it. Maui occupies a fascinating space in the world of mythology. He is described as a demigod, a word that sounds simple but carries enormous complexity. He is not fully divine, sitting untouchable among the gods beyond the reach of ordinary life. But he is not fully human either, bound by the same limits and fragility that shape mortal experience. He exists somewhere in between. That in-between space is part of what makes him so compelling, and perhaps part of why his stories have lasted so long. He is extraordinary but not unreachable. His mother's name shifts across different traditions, as so many details do, but she is consistently connected to lineage, to power, and to magic. She carries the kind of quiet authority that shapes a person long before they understand how deeply they've been shaped. Some versions of the story say that Maui did not enter the world in any ordinary way. He was born prematurely, too soon, too small, perhaps not expected to survive at all. In some tellings, his mother wrapped him in a top knot of her own hair and placed him into the sea. It is a striking image, an infant alone given to the ocean. But the ocean did not swallow him. It did not pull him under or carry him away into nothing. Instead, it held him, sheltered him. The sea, which can be so terrifying and so vast, became something gentle around this particular child. From his very first moments, Maui belonged to two worlds. He was a creature of the land, shaped by human blood and human story. And he was a creature of the sea, cradled and carried by waters that seemed to recognize something in him. Something worth keeping. There is something deeply human about looking up at the sky and wishing for more time. Even now, on the shortest days of the year, when the light fades in the late afternoon and the darkness settles in before the evening meal is finished, people feel that particular frustration. The sense that the day slipped away before anything important could be completed. That there simply wasn't enough of it. Imagine feeling that way every single day. Long ago, according to the stories told across Polynesia, the sun did not move at the steady, generous pace we rely on now. It raced. It tore across the sky with no regard for the people below, no concern for what they needed or how much they had left to do. The sun rose, blazed briefly overhead, and then disappeared below the horizon before anyone was ready for it to go. Days were desperately short. Crops struggled. Fishermen couldn't complete their work on the water. Families ate in darkness. Weavers had to put down their work unfinished, night after night, because the light had abandoned them again. Maui watched all of this. This is one of the things that separates Maui from the kinds of heroes who wait for a quest to find them. He didn't look away. He didn't accept the situation as simply the way things were. He watched his people struggling, exhausted, frustrated, never able to get ahead, and he felt something stir inside him. Not just sympathy, something sharper than that, a decision. If the sun was moving too quickly, then someone needed to slow it down. Most people, hearing that idea, would have let it pass through their minds and disappear. A thought too large and too impossible to hold on to. But Maui was not most people. He turned the idea over, examined it from every angle, and began to make a plan. He would need ropes. Not ordinary ropes, the kind of restraints that might hold a canoe or tie down a bundle of supplies. These would need to be something far stronger. And the traditions that tell this story, Maui prepared ropes woven from sacred fibers, materials chosen with care and intention, twisted and braided into something capable of holding what no rope had ever been asked to hold before. Some versions of the story say the ropes were made from the hair of his sister, Hina, giving them a connection to something powerful and deeply personal. Then he gathered his brothers. The journey east was not a casual one. They traveled toward the place where the sun begins its daily crossing, the far eastern edge of the world where dawn is born. It was a journey toward something enormous and dangerous, and they made it with full knowledge of what they were attempting. When they arrived, they waited. There is something worth sitting within that image. Maui and his brothers, crouched in the darkness of very early morning, holding their ropes, waiting in complete silence for the most powerful force in the sky to appear. The kind of waiting that requires everything you have. Stillness on the outside while something electric moves through you on the inside. Then the light began. The sun rose, as it always did, in a blaze of heat and light and total confidence, and they threw their ropes. The fibers caught. The sun was held. And here is where Maui's particular nature comes through most clearly. He did not simply restrain the sun and ask it nicely to reconsider its schedule. He struck it, repeatedly, with force and fury and the absolute refusal to be intimidated by something simply because it was larger and more powerful than he was. The sun, caught and struck and unable to continue on its way, eventually relented. It made a promise. It would move more slowly. It would give the world below the time it needed. And from that day forward, the days grew longer. It is a story about refusing to accept a limitation just because it has always existed. About looking at something that affects everyone and deciding that someone ought to do something about it. About the remarkable things that become possible when you combine preparation, courage, and the kind of stubbornness that simply will not acknowledge that something is impossible. Maui didn't ask the sun for a favor. He made it keep one. There's an old question that sits beneath nearly every island culture in the Pacific. Where did all of this come from? Look around at an island, really look at it, and the question becomes almost impossible to ignore. Here is this solid, remarkable thing, rising up out of an ocean that stretches in every direction farther than the eye can follow. The water goes on, immense and deep and indifferent, and yet here is land. Here are mountains. Here are valleys where rivers run, and soil holds roots, and people build their lives. How does something like that exist in the middle of so much nothing? Science has its answers, of course. Volcanic activity, tectonic shifts, millions of years of geological patience. But long before those explanations existed, the people of Polynesia had their own answer, and it featured Maui. In many traditions scattered across the Pacific, Maui is the one who pulled the islands up from the sea. The tool he used was a hook. Not a simple fishing hook carved for an afternoon on the water. This was something extraordinary. In several versions of the story, the hook was fashioned from a jawbone. Some say it was the jawbone of an ancestor, which would make it not just a tool, but a connection, a line stretching back through generations, literally used to reshape the world. The hook had a name in some traditions. It was an object of power, treated with the same seriousness you might give to something sacred. Maui took this hook and cast it far out, letting the line sink down through the water, past the shallows, past the places where light still reaches, down into the deep cold darkness of the ocean floor. His brothers were with him, as they often were, and as they often did, they doubted. This detail appears again and again in the stories of Maui, and it's worth noticing. His brothers are not villains. They are not trying to stop him out of cruelty or jealousy, at least, not always. They are simply people who look at what Maui is attempting and cannot quite believe it will work. They are the voice of reasonable skepticism. The part of any group that says, this seems unlikely. This seems like too much. Are we sure about this? Maui was always sure. The line went taut. Something enormous had taken hold on the other end, far below the surface. The ocean floor trembled with the strain of it, and then, slowly, not all at once, not in a dramatic instant, but gradually, the way truly large things tend to move, something began to rise. First, the ridges appeared, breaking the surface like the spine of some unimaginable creature. Then more land followed, water pouring off the sides in great cascades as the mass continued upward. What had been the ridges of a great fish became mountains. What had been the spaces between its scales became valleys, long, curved, sheltered places where eventually trees would grow and birds would nest and people would find their way. The islands in this telling were not random accidents of geology. They were the body of Maui's catch. Each peak and valley and coastal curve a part of something that had once been whole and living, drawn up from the deep by a hook made from bone and a fisherman who refused to believe the ocean had a limit. In Aotearoa, the story carries particular weight. The long, sweeping shape of the North Island is said by some to be Maui's fish, Te Aikea Maui, the fish of Maui, hauled up from the sea in that ancient act of creation. The South Island, in some traditions, is the canoe from which he fished. These are not just pretty stories. For the Maori people, they are a way of understanding the land itself as something alive, something with a history that goes deeper than any human memory. The ocean that surrounds these islands is not simply water. It is the reminder of that original depth. the place the hook went down, the vast space that gave something up when Maui pulled. Every time a wave reaches a shore, it is the ocean doing what it has always done, pressing up against the edges of what Maui brought into the world, remembering the moment when the land was still its own. Every culture, in every corner of the world, seems to have one. The trickster. The figure who sits at the edges of the established order and grins. Who looks at the rules, the deep, ancient, seemingly permanent rules about how things work and what is allowed and what must never be attempted, and feels not obedience, not even fear, but something closer to curiosity, to appetite. The trickster doesn't necessarily want to cause harm. That's an important distinction. The trickster simply cannot leave a boundary alone, cannot walk past a line in the sand without at least considering what might be on the other side. Maui is one of the great tricksters of world mythology, an understanding that helps explain almost everything about him. Across all the island traditions that carry his stories, one thread runs through every single one of them. Maui rarely, perhaps never, accepted the limits of the natural world as final. The sun moves too quickly? Challenge it. Islands don't exist where you need them? Go fishing. Death takes everyone eventually? We'll come back to that one. For Maui, the word impossible seems to have functioned less as a warning and more as an invitation. This placed him in a fascinating and sometimes uncomfortable position, because the natural world in Polynesian tradition is not a neutral backdrop. It is ordered. It is governed. The boundaries between what is human and what is divine are not arbitrary lines. They carry weight and meaning and consequence. And Maui spent a great deal of his life pressing against exactly those boundaries, testing where the human world ended and the divine world began, and occasionally stepping across without asking permission. Trickster figures do this across cultures. From Anansi the spider in West African tradition, to Coyote in the stories of many indigenous North American peoples, to Loki in Norse mythology. These are figures who disrupt, who rearrange, who reveal things about the world precisely because they refuse to accept it as fixed. Sometimes what they reveal is wonderful. Sometimes it is dangerous. Often it is both at once. Maui's cleverness brought genuine gifts, longer days, land to live on, fire, in some traditions, wrestled away from those who kept it and given to the people who needed it. These are not small things. These are the foundations of livable human life. In this sense, Maui is not merely a mischief maker. He is a benefactor. Someone whose refusal to accept limitations ended up improving the conditions of everyone around him. But the stories are honest about the other side of that, too. Cleverness without caution has a cost. Actions taken boldly, without full understanding of their consequences, have a way of producing outcomes that nobody intended. Maui's interventions in the order of things did not always unfold the way he planned. Some of his greatest moments contain the seeds of something darker, something unresolved. A reminder that reshaping reality is not a clean or simple business, even when the intentions behind it are genuine. In certain traditions, Maui had the ability to change his shape. He could take the form of animals, move through the world in ways that a fixed human body would never allow. This gave him access to places and situations that would otherwise be closed to him, and it added another layer to his already complicated nature. He was never entirely one thing. Not fully human, not fully divine, and in those traditions, not even locked into a single physical form. What he relied on, more than anything else, was his mind. His brothers had strength. They had the same blood, the same heritage, the same access to the ocean and the sky. But Maui consistently outmaneuvered situations through wit rather than force. He thought sideways. He noticed things others missed. He found the angle that nobody else had considered, and he moved through it. And yet his brothers kept showing up. That's the part worth sitting with. They doubted him, consistently and often loudly. They questioned his plans, his chances, his fundamental grasp of what was and wasn't possible. But when Maui set out to do something extraordinary, his brothers were generally there beside him. Doubt and loyalty, it turns out, are not mutually exclusive. You can believe something is unlikely and still choose to be part of it. Through mischief, through daring, through a restless and relentless refusal to leave the world exactly as he found it, Maui reshaped reality. Not always cleanly, not always safely, but always completely. Think about everything fire makes possible. Warmth on a cold night. A meal cooked rather than eaten raw. Light that pushes the darkness back far enough to feel safe inside it. The ability to gather, to sit together in a circle with something bright at the center, telling stories, sharing food, feeling less alone in the enormous dark of the world. Fire is so fundamental to human life that it can be difficult to imagine existence without it. It sits so far back at the beginning of things that most of us have never had to think about where it came from or what it cost. Maui thought about it. In some traditions across Polynesia, there was a time when humans did not have fire. Not a brief inconvenience, a genuine and profound absence. The cold was colder. The nights were longer in every sense that mattered. Food was whatever it was before flame touched it. And somewhere hidden away was the secret of fire itself, kept by someone with no particular intention of sharing it. Her name was Mawika. She was the guardian of fire, a figure of immense power, and in the stories that tell of her, the flames she kept were not stored in any ordinary vessel. They were held in her fingernails. Each nail contained a flame, a burning secret carried in the most personal way imaginable, part of her body, part of herself. Maui went to find her. This is the pattern of Maui, not waiting for what is needed to arrive, but going directly toward the source of it, even when the source is ancient and powerful and has every reason to be suspicious of a visitor. He approached Mawika and asked her for fire. And she, perhaps because of who he was, perhaps out of some combination of generosity and curiosity, agreed. She pulled a fingernail and gave him the flame it held. He extinguished it. Then he went back and asked for another. What followed was a remarkable and rather audacious sequence of events. Each time Maui received a flame, he put it out. Each time, he returned with some reason why he needed another. One by one, Mahuika's flames were given away and extinguished, her extraordinary store of fire depleted by what appeared to be an incredibly careless or incredibly deliberate visitor. Mahuika was patient for longer than perhaps she should have been. But patience has a limit, and eventually she reached hers. When the last flames were nearly gone, something shifted. The story that had been a slow, almost playful negotiation became something far more serious. Mahuika's anger, when it finally arrived, was not small or contained. She released what remained of her fire not as a gift, but as a force, and the flames spread. Across the ground, through the trees, over the land, fire moved in every direction with the energy of something that had been held back and was now entirely free. Maui ran. Even he, with all his confidence and cleverness, understood that there are moments when the correct response is to move quickly in the opposite direction. He called for rain, and rain came. Heavy and total, the kind of downpour that can smother almost anything. Almost. The fire was extinguished across the open land. The flames that had been spreading and consuming were put out, one after another, until the air was cool and wet and still. But not every flame disappeared completely. Something remained, not as open fire, but as something stored. Hidden inside certain trees, in the fibers of the wood itself, the last of Mahuika's fire took shelter. And that is why the story tells us wood still holds fire within it. Strike the right two pieces together with the right motion and enough patience, and something appears. Not from nowhere, from somewhere very specific. From the moment Mahuika's flames retreated into the trees and waited there through all the years and centuries that followed, for someone to know how to call them back out. It is a story that takes something as ordinary as a cooking fire or a struck match and places behind it an entire world of negotiation and deception and consequence. It says that nothing as important as fire simply exists. It was sought. It was taken through cleverness that pushed into something close to cruelty. It was nearly lost entirely. And what was saved not in any grand or obvious place, but quietly inside the ordinary materials of everyday life. Something shifted in the world the night fire settled into the trees. It is difficult to explain from where we sit now what genuine darkness once meant. Not the comfortable darkness of a bedroom with curtains drawn, with the faint glow of something electronic somewhere nearby, with the knowledge that light is a single switch away. True darkness. The kind that has weight and texture. The kind that presses in from every direction and makes the distance between one person and the next feel enormous, even when they are only a few steps apart. The kind of darkness that reminds every animal, including the humankind, that the night belongs to things they cannot see. Fire changed that. Fundamentally, permanently, in ways that rippled outward through every part of human life. After Maui's encounter with Mahuika, after the flames retreated into the wood and the rain settled and the world found its new arrangement, people discovered that the darkness no longer had to be simply endured. It could be invited in, held at a comfortable distance, kept outside the circle of warmth and light that a fire creates. And once that circle existed, something happened that perhaps even Maui had not fully anticipated. People began to gather inside it, not just for warmth, though warmth mattered enormously. Not just for the practical business of preparing food, though that mattered too. They gathered because fire creates a particular kind of space, intimate, bounded, somehow separate from the rest of the world. When you sit inside the circle of a fire at night, the darkness beyond its edge becomes a kind of wall. And inside that wall, something opens up. Time slows, voices soften. The things that feel urgent in the full light of day begin to release their grip a little. Villages gathered more often in the evenings now, and around those fires, the stories of Maui continued to grow. This is how mythology sustains itself, not through official preservation or formal recording, but through exactly this: people collecting in the warmth, in the dark, with time on their hands, and the ocean nearby and the stars overhead, and someone beginning to speak. Each telling added something, a detail remembered differently, a new connection noticed between one story and another. The Maui who emerged from these evening gatherings was not fixed or finished. He was continuously becoming, shaped by every voice that took up his story and carried it forward. What those voices returned to, again and again, was a particular quality of Maui that set him apart from the distant, untouchable figures of pure divinity. Though often described as powerful, capable of feats that no ordinary person could attempt, Maui did not live at a remove from ordinary life. He did not occupy some elevated realm, looking down at human struggle with the detached interest of someone watching from a great height. He walked beside people. In many traditions, this is simply taken as fact. Maui was present in the everyday world in a way that most powerful figures are not. He observed the struggles of the people around him with close, genuine attention, not the way a ruler observes subjects, but the way someone watches a problem they intend to solve. He noticed what was difficult. He noticed what wasn't working. And then, characteristically, he started thinking about what might be done about it. When fish were scarce, and there were seasons when when the usual methods came up empty and families felt the particular anxiety of watching their stores diminish, Maui sought ways to improve the catch. He studied the problem with the same focused energy he brought to everything else. In some stories, he taught those around him how to craft stronger hooks, better shapes, better materials, better angles. The kind of incremental improvement that comes from someone who is actually paying attention rather than simply repeating what has always been done. His own magical hook, the one that had pulled islands from the ocean floor, became, in this context, a symbol of something beyond magic. It represented skill, patience, the understanding that the right tool, thoughtfully made and carefully used, changes what is possible. There is wisdom in that symbol that has nothing supernatural about it. Every craftsperson who has ever taken time to make a tool correctly rather than quickly has understood what Maui's hook represents. Fishing in Polynesian cultures was never merely a means of filling a stomach. It was knowledge, complex, accumulated, carefully tended knowledge about the ocean and its creatures and the tools and techniques and timing required to bring them together successfully. That knowledge was not written down. It was demonstrated, practiced, corrected, and passed from one generation to the next with the same care and intention that other cultures applied to written texts. Maui's connection to the sea reflects this heritage at its deepest level. He is not just a fisherman. He is a figure who embodies the entire tradition of knowing the ocean well enough to work with it. Navigators who carried Pacific peoples across thousands of miles of open water memorized the stars, not a few bright ones, but hundreds, their positions throughout the night and throughout the year, the way they rose and set relative to specific islands and specific destinations. They memorized currents, learning to feel the difference between one body of moving water and another through the hull of a canoe. They watched birds, knowing that certain species appeared only within a certain distance of land, that their flight direction at certain times of day pointed reliably toward something solid on the horizon. The ocean, in this understanding, was not empty space. It was a pathway, mapped not on paper, but in the minds and bodies of the people who traveled it. Maui inhabits this world completely, a figure whose relationship with the sea is not one of conquest or fear, but of deep, practiced familiarity. His practical curiosity extended beyond fishing. In some tellings, Maui experimented constantly with tools and materials, adjusting, testing, refining until something worked the way he needed it to. He tested the strength of vines before trusting them with weight. He studied the natural curve of certain woods to find the shapes that would serve him best. He understood rope not just as a material, but as a system, knowing that how something is twisted and joined determines what it can ultimately bear. This attention to practical detail sits interestingly alongside his more dramatic qualities. The same figure who challenged the sun and attempted to defeat death also stopped to check whether his equipment would hold. Boldness and observation, it turns out, are not opposites. The most effective kind of daring is the kind that has done its preparation. Through trial and error, through the willingness to fail and adjust and try again, Maui modeled something that his stories have been quietly teaching ever since. That persistence is not simply stubbornness. It is a method. It is what separates a single attempt from a genuine effort to understand. And then there is the sky. In some traditions, the sky in early times did not sit at its current generous height. It hung low, pressing down on the tops of trees, grazing the peaks of mountains, close enough that the world below felt cramped and dim beneath its weight. Birds could not fully stretch their wings. Forests could not fully reach upward. People moved through a world with a ceiling that felt just slightly too near. So Maui pushed it up. Not in a single dramatic gesture, but with steady, sustained effort, pressing upward against the weight of the heavens until they rose to the height they now occupy. Until trees could grow as tall as they needed to. Until birds could climb as high as their wings would carry them. Until people could stand fully upright and look up at the sky without any sense of it pressing back. This act carries the same essential meaning as slowing the sun, the expansion of human possibility, the removal of a constraint that nobody had chosen and everyone had simply accepted. Maui looked at a sky that hung too low and thought, "This does not have to be this way." He rarely acted for praise. There's no version of these stories where Maui pauses to receive gratitude or acknowledgement before moving on to the next impossible thing. He acted from something more restless and more fundamental than the desire for recognition. He wanted to know what would happen if a limit was tested. He wanted to find out whether the walls of the world were as solid as they appeared. Sometimes they were not. Sometimes they gave way entirely, and the world on the other side was better than the one before. And sometimes, as he would discover, the testing itself carried consequences that no amount of cleverness could fully anticipate or undo. But that is the nature of reaching. You cannot know what you will find until your hand is already extended. The sun had been slowed. Islands had been raised from the ocean floor. Fire had been taken from the one who kept it and distributed to the people who needed it. Limitation after limitation had been approached, examined, and overcome through some combination of cleverness, courage, and a refusal to accept that the word impossible applied to him in any permanent way. But there was one limitation that remained, one that shadowed everything else, one that no amount of wit or strength or sacred rope or magical hook had yet been turned against. Death. Maui did not like death. This is perhaps the most human thing about him, more human than his mortal blood, more human than his doubting brothers or his complicated family. The discomfort with mortality, the resistance to it, the deep and restless sense that it simply should not be the way things are, that is something that reaches across every culture and every era of human history. We have always struggled with the fact that we end. Maui struggled with it too. But where most people carry that struggle quietly, Maui decided to do something about it. In some traditions, death is not merely a process or an absence. It is a presence, a being, a goddess, immense, ancient, and in the version of this story that has endured most powerfully, sleeping. Her name was Hainui-Te-Ipa, which carries the meaning of great woman of the night, the guardian of the underworld, the one through whom all living things eventually pass. She was sleeping when Maui found her. His plan, in its way, was as audacious as anything he had ever attempted. Perhaps more so, he intended to enter her body while she slept, to pass through the goddess of death completely, emerging from her mouth, and in doing so reverse the journey that every mortal being makes. To move through death in the wrong direction. To come out the other side not as someone who had died, but as someone who had unmade dying. And not just for himself, for everyone. This is the detail that changes the entire weight of the story. Maui was not attempting this purely for his own survival. He believed or hoped that if he succeeded, mortality itself might be reversed for all of humankind. That death would lose its claim. That the people he had already given longer days and fire and land to stand on might also be given the one gift that would make all the others truly complete. He asked the birds who traveled with him to stay silent. This was essential. Hainui-Te-Ipa was sleeping, and everything depended on her remaining that way. The attempt required stillness, required patience, required the kind of absolute quiet that holds its breath and does not release it. The birds understood. They waited. All except one. A small bird, the puwaka-waka, the fantail in the Maui tradition, found the sight in front of it too extraordinary to bear in silence. There is something almost unbearably relatable about this. The bird was not malicious. It was not trying to ruin everything. It simply could not hold back. The situation was too strange, too much, too unlike anything that had ever happened before, and so it laughed. The sound was small, but it was enough. Hainu woke. What happened next was not a battle, not a negotiation, not another clever escape. There was no rope to throw, no rain to call, no way to think sideways out of the situation. The goddess of death, awakened in the moment of Maui's attempt, crushed him. And that was the end of Maui. The one who had slowed the sun and raised the islands and stolen fire from its guardian could not, in the end, defeat the thing that waits for everyone. He came closer than anyone else had ever come. Closer, perhaps, than anyone ever will. But close was not enough. From that moment, the stories say, death remained part of human life. Not because it had to be, not because there was never any other possibility, but because an attempt was made and it failed. Because a small bird laughed at exactly the wrong moment. Because even the most extraordinary among us carries something fragile at the center. Maui gave humanity so much. In the end, he could not give us this. Close your eyes, if they aren't already. Imagine water in every direction. Not a lake, not a river, ocean. The kind of ocean that doesn't end, that goes on past the horizon in every direction, deeper than any anchor has ever reached, broader than any single person could ever fully comprehend. Now imagine crossing it, not with maps, not with instruments built from metal and glass, with memory, with stars, with the feel of a current moving beneath a wooden hull and the knowledge, passed down through generations, of exactly what that movement means. This is what the ancestors of Polynesian peoples did. Repeatedly, across thousands of years. The ocean appears in nearly every story of Maui, and this is not an accident. It is not simply atmospheric detail or convenient setting. It reflects something true and central about the cultures that created and carried these stories. Polynesian peoples are, at their core, ocean peoples. Their relationship with the sea is not one of distance or fear. It is intimate. It is the relationship of people who know something deeply because they have trusted their lives to it over and over across countless generations. Navigation was not a technical skill practiced by specialists. It was a form of knowledge woven into the fabric of culture itself. The stars were not decorations scattered across the night sky. They were a map, a calendar, a compass, a clock. Navigators learned to read the heavens the way others might learn to read a landscape, recognizing patterns and positions and the slow, reliable movements that could tell you exactly where you were on the surface of an otherwise featureless ocean. And it wasn't only the stars. The color of the water changed as you moved between depths and shallows. Certain birds appeared only near land. Clouds gathered differently above islands than above open sea. Swells moved in patterns that a trained navigator could feel through the hull of a canoe, reading the ocean's texture the way you might run your fingers across something in the dark and understand its shape without needing to see it. Maui's hook, cast deep into that same ocean, mirrors these traditions in a way that feels entirely natural. Fishing is not merely a practical activity in this context. It is an act of relationship, of reaching down into something vast and unknown and pulling something essential back up. The hook connects the world above the surface to the world below it. It is a line between the known and the unknown, between what we have and what we need, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The canoe in Polynesian tradition is far more than a vessel for crossing water. It is a technology of connection. With a canoe, isolated islands became part of a network. Communities separated by hundreds of miles of open ocean could maintain relationships, share knowledge, exchange goods, carry stories. The Pacific was not a barrier, it was a highway. The islands were not lonely outposts. They were nodes in a vast and living web. The sea, in this worldview, was never empty. It was crowded with meaning, with life beneath its surface and knowledge written into its movements, with the presence of ancestors who had crossed it and the expectation that descendants would cross it again. Every current had a name. Every swell had information in it. The ocean was, in every sense that mattered, alive. Maui's stories breathe this understanding. The way he moves through the world, from island to island, from sea to sky, from the human realm to the divine, reflects the oceanic reality of the culture that shaped him. He is a figure in perpetual motion, never fixed, never settled, always crossing some boundary or another. Like the great voyaging canoes that carried his stories from one island chain to the next, he belongs to the spaces between things as much as he belongs to any one place. The tides have carried these legends for a very long time. They are still carrying them now. One of the most remarkable things about Maui is not any single deed he performed. It is the fact that he exists at all, consistently, recognizably, across thousands of miles of open ocean, in cultures that developed independently on islands separated by some of the most challenging stretches of water on Earth. That his name, his personality, and the essential shape of his story survived that journey, carried in human memory across generations and across the Pacific, is itself a kind of miracle. But survival across distance is rarely a clean process. Things change as they travel. They pick up the texture of new places, new climates, new landscapes. They shed details that don't fit and absorb details that do. And so, while Maui is recognizably himself wherever you find him, he is also, in each place, distinctly shaped by the world around him. Hawaiian traditions describe Maui with a particular energy. There is a lightness to him in many Hawaiian stories, a playfulness that sits close to the surface, a sense of humor that runs through even his most dramatic moments. He is the trickster in full color, delighting in the cleverness of his own schemes, moving through his adventures with something that looks almost like joy. The Hawaiian landscape, volcanic, dramatic, full of sudden contrast between fire and ocean, lush valley and sharp peak, seems to have given its version of Maui a corresponding vibrancy. In Aotearoa, the Maori traditions carry Maui with somewhat different weight. He is still clever, still restless, still entirely himself, but the stories often have a more serious undertone. The heroic dimensions are emphasized. His relationship with his family, his waka papa, his genealogy, and the connections it carries matters enormously in this tradition. The Maui is embedded in a deep framework of ancestry and obligation that gives his adventures a gravity that sits alongside the mischief rather than replacing it. Elsewhere in Samoa, in Tahiti, in the smaller island groups scattered across the Pacific, further variations emerge. His family members have different names. The order of his great deeds shifts. Certain adventures belong only to one tradition, appearing nowhere else, shaped by something specific to that island's history or geography or spiritual understanding. This is how oral storytelling works. It is not a fixed text, printed once and preserved unchanged. It is a living practice, shaped by the person telling it, by the audience receiving it, by the landscape outside and the season around them. A story told in a valley between two steep mountains will carry the weight of those mountains. A story told on a low coral island, surrounded entirely by ocean with no high ground anywhere in sight, will feel the ocean in every sentence. Volcanoes appear in Maui stories with particular frequency wherever volcanic islands are home to the people telling them. The drama of a landscape that can split open and pour fire into the sea is not background detail. It becomes part of the mythic vocabulary. Mountains that were formed by ancient eruptions become the bones of creatures Maui once caught or fought or transformed. The geography is not separate from the story. It is inside the story, explaining itself through the story. Climate shapes things too. Islands with dramatic seasonal variation carry that variation into their narratives. Islands where the ocean is gentle have different relationships with the sea than those battered by powerful seasonal storms. All of this finds its way gradually and organically into the texture of the tales. And yet, through all of this variation, through the playful Hawaiian Maui and the more solemn Maori one, through the different names and different sequences and different local details, the core remains. The essential Maui is present everywhere. Clever, restless, unwilling to accept the world as fixed. Testing the boundary between human and divine. Acting on behalf of the people around him even when, especially when, what he is attempting seems impossible. He represents change, not change as disruption or loss, but change as the necessary force that makes improvement possible. He is what happens when someone refuses to accept that the present moment is the final word on how things must always be. His presence across the Pacific is not just a fact of cultural history. It is a kind of thread, something that connects islands and peoples and traditions that might otherwise seem entirely separate. Follow that thread from Hawaii to Aotearoa, from Samoa to Tahiti and beyond, and what you find at every stop is the same restless, grinning, boundary-crossing figure. Still fishing, still pulling things up from the deep, still refusing to leave the world exactly as he found it. Strip away the magic for a moment. Set aside the enchanted hook, the sacred ropes, the goddess sleeping in the underworld. Remove the shape-shifting and the supernatural fire hidden in fingernails and the ocean trembling as something enormous rises from its floor. Take all of that away and look at what remains underneath. And what you find is something entirely, almost startlingly human. Maui stories are not really about a demigod. They are about us. Every culture that has ever existed has needed to make sense of its own history, to find a way to explain not just where things came from, but why people reach for them in the first place. Why someone at some point looked at the world as it was and decided to try to make it different. Mythology is one of the oldest and most powerful tools humans have ever developed for doing exactly that. And Maui, across all his variations and all his islands, is one of mythology's most complete expressions of the human drive to change things. He symbolizes ingenuity, that particular quality of mind that doesn't just solve problems but finds unexpected angles, approaches situations sideways, notices what everyone else has overlooked. The kind of thinking that produces not just answers, but entirely new ways of asking questions. Ingenuity is not simply intelligence. It is intelligence combined with imagination, combined with a willingness to try something that has never been tried before. Maui has it in extraordinary abundance. He represents ambition in its most fundamental form. Not ambition as greed or self-promotion, but the older, more essential version. The desire to expand what is possible. To look at the horizon and wonder what's beyond it. To look at a limitation and wonder whether it actually needs to stay. Consider what each of his great deeds represents when you hold it up to the light of human history. Slowing the sun is about control over time. About the refusal to simply accept that days are as long as they are and nothing can be done about it. Every tool humans have ever built to extend productivity, to push back against the darkness, to squeeze more useful hours from a day, the candle, the lamp, the electric light, carries in it the same impulse that sent Maui east with ropes in his hands. We have always wanted more time. We have always found ways to take it. Raising islands from the sea reflects the reality of settlement itself. The Pacific was not populated by accident. People looked out at open ocean and chose to cross it, carrying with them everything needed to build a life on whatever they found on the other side. That act of deliberate settlement, of deciding that land exists somewhere out there and going to claim it, is exactly what Maui's fishing story encodes. The hook going down, the land coming up, the world expanding because someone refused to stay where they were. Stealing fire reflects technological discovery. Every time a human being figured out something new, how to smelt metal, how to harness steam, how to split an atom, there was a Mahuika in the story somewhere. Some existing power, some established order, some guardian of the old way that had to be confronted and negotiated with and ultimately overcome. Progress is almost never a clean transaction. It costs something. It upsets something. It occasionally sets the landscape on fire. and seeking immortality, that long, impossible, heartbreaking attempt to enter the house of death and come back out the other side, reflects the oldest longing in the human story. We have never accepted mortality gracefully. We have buried our dead with provisions for a journey. We have built monuments to outlast our bodies. We have told stories specifically so that something of us might continue after we are gone. Maui simply tried to solve the problem directly with the same boldness he brought to everything else. He failed, but the attempt itself is deeply, recognizably ours. His failures matter as much as his successes. Perhaps more. A figure who only succeeded would be inspiring in a distant, untouchable way, more symbol than story. But Maui fails. The bird laughs, the goddess wakes, death remains, and in that failure, there is something that reaches across every cultural boundary and every century. The reminder that even the most extraordinary among us cannot do everything. That humility is not a weakness to be overcome, but a truth to be carried. His successes inspire courage. His failures teach proportion. Together, they make him whole. Maui endures because he is not a god looking down at human struggle from a comfortable distance. He is in it, fully, messily, gloriously in it, transforming the world, one impossible thing at a time. There was never a book, not at first, not for a very long time. The stories of Maui did not begin as words on a page, carefully preserved behind glass in a library somewhere, waiting to be checked out and carried home. They began as breath, as voice, as the particular cadence of a particular person who had heard these stories from someone else, who had heard them from someone else before that, stretching back in an unbroken human chain across more generations than any written record could fully capture. Elders shared them by firelight. Picture that for a moment as your own breathing slows and the details of your day begin to soften and recede. A fire at the center. People gathered around it in the particular way that humans have always gathered around fire. Close enough to feel the warmth, faces illuminated in that shifting amber light that makes everyone look ancient and timeless all at once. And someone speaking, not performing exactly, telling, passing something from one set of hands to another. The way you might carefully transfer something precious and irreplaceable. The rhythm of the ocean often accompanied the telling. Waves have a timing that is not quite like anything else, not mechanical, not random, but somewhere beautifully between the two. They arrive with just enough regularity to settle the nervous system and just enough variation to keep the mind softly engaged. The people who first told Maui stories lived inside that sound. It was the background of everything, the constant, patient voice beneath all other voices. And overhead, on those nights of storytelling, the same stars that guided canoes across open ocean looked down on the telling of the stories those voyages had carried. There's something quietly extraordinary about that, the navigation and the mythology sharing the same sky. The stars as both practical instrument and cosmic backdrop doing two kinds of work simultaneously without any contradiction between them. The Pacific night sky remains vast and quiet. If you have ever been somewhere truly far from artificial light and looked up, you will have some sense of what those storytelling nights contained. Not the pale suggestion of stars that most of us see through the glow of our cities, but the full and overwhelming presence of them. Thousands upon thousands, the Milky Way not a smudge, but a river. The darkness between the stars somehow making each one more distinct and more necessary. A sky like that doesn't just sit above a story. It becomes part of it. In some traditions, Maui's hook can be found up there among the constellations. The curved arrangement of stars that others might call Scorpius traces the shape of that great fishing hook across the southern sky. The same hook that once caught the ocean floor and pulled land up into the light. On clear nights, from the right islands, at the right time of year, you can look up and find it. The tool of the great Demi-God, preserved not in a museum, but in the sky itself, visible to anyone who knows where to look. Meanwhile, beneath the ocean, the work continues without any help from mythology at all. Islands are still forming. Volcanic activity deep beneath the Pacific pushes new land slowly, incrementally upward through the water column. What Maui was said to have done in a single extraordinary act of fishing, the earth does quietly and continuously in the dark, adding to the archipelagos, building new foundations, reminding anyone paying attention that the story of land rising from the sea is not only ancient history. The sun still moves at its steady pace, neither racing the way it once did before Maui intervened, nor stopping entirely. Just that reliable, generous arc across the sky that gives the world its days. Long enough for work, for meals, for the particular quality of late afternoon light that makes everything look briefly like it belongs in a story. Every long summer day is, in its way, Maui's gift. Most of us accept it without knowing who to thank. And stories still travel across water. Not in canoes anymore, mostly. Not carried in the memory of a navigator who also knows which stars mark the path to the next island, but moving nonetheless, across distances that would have seemed impossible to the first people who told these tales, reaching people who have never seen the Pacific and may never stand on any of its islands. The stories found their way here, to this quiet moment, to wherever you are right now as the night settles around you. And so, dear dreamers, the sun moves at its patient pace. The islands rest upon the sea. Fire still waits quietly within the and the stories of Maui, the clever voyager, the daring trickster, the restless spirit, continue to drift across the Pacific night. For generations, these legends have been carried by voice alone, shared beside ocean shores, told beneath wide constellations, passed carefully from one heart to another. Tonight, they have traveled a little farther. If there is another legend you would like to wander through, perhaps from the islands of the Pacific, the forests of the north, the deserts of the southwest, or the mountains of distant lands, you are always welcome to leave your suggestion in the comments below. I read every on. and your ideas help guide where Sleepy Legends journeys next. T. If this quiet exploration brought you a moment of calm, a gentle like helps others find their way here too. Oh, and if you enjoy drifting through ancient stories in an unhurried way, consider subscribing so you can return whenever you need rest. T. For now, let the night grow softer. Let your thoughts grow light. Let the tide carry you gently toward SL. Eep. Until next time.